What a show we've got for you today. My guest is Dylan Thuras. He's the co-founder of Atlas Obscura, one of my favorite travel resources out there. They have a global community of millions of explorers who have created a comprehensive database of the world's most wondrous places and foods. And today, he is going to share his personal top 7 hidden wonders of the world, one continent at a time. And keep in mind, this is what Dylan does for a living. He curates an eclectic mix of foods, destinations, sites, natural wonders from all over the world. So he has a lot of knowledge to draw on. I was really curious to hear how he would boil this list down to 7. And I also had him pair a food with each of these sites and destinations. So a lot of really interesting stories to go along with each of these that he mentions. A lot of fun to be had here as a listener. I had a blast recording this, and you'll hear as the list reveals itself a lot of unexpected things on this list, and I suppose that's to be expected when you talk to Dylan. So please enjoy the show. On top of that, I'm going to share a quick personal update, something that was a thrill for me, one of my big bucket list items, and a few lessons I learned from that, and a shout out to somebody in this community. All of that happening right now. So buckle up, strap in. Thanks for being here, and welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend.
You're listening to the Zero to Travel podcast, where we explore exciting travel-based work, lifestyle, and business opportunities, helping you to achieve your wildest travel dreams. And now your host, world wanderer and travel junkie, Jason Moore.
Hey, what's up? It's Jason with ZeroToTravel.com. Welcome to the show. Thanks for hanging out, for being here, for letting me bring a little travel into your ears today. This is the show to help you travel the world on your terms, to fill your life with as much travel as you desire, no matter what your situation or experience. Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is a community-powered show. Let us not forget, I always like to remind you to please get in touch. If you haven't done so, you have a guest recommendation, you just want to say hi, drop me a line. Jason@zerototravel.com is my email. Of course, I leave a link to my voicemail box where you can leave me a message. It takes literally 90 seconds. So get in touch, say hi, make this show for you. I've got some exciting guests and topics we're going to be covering soon. I'm actually physically rubbing my hands together, like not rubbing them together like I'm in charge of an evil empire rubbing them together, but more of the sort of palms rubbing them together excitedly thing, the Mr. Miyagi meets, I don't know what I'm trying to say. Anyway, I'm excited. So if you haven't subscribed to the show yet, you should subscribe. There's plenty of cool stuff coming your way. I do want to give a shout out to somebody here in this community, because I like to shout out those listeners who are taking action to create their own life of travel. Now the shout outs for Adam. Congratulations, Adam. Dropped me a line. Said, transition to travel contender? Perhaps we might have Adam on the show later this year, because here's what he told me. He said, greetings from grey and rainy Ireland. I hope you're doing well. Big fan of the podcast. Been listening for a couple years and love learning from the amazing guests you bring on the show, particularly the nomadic folk. I'm reaching out as of next year. I will be leaving for an 18-month solo backpacking trip around South America. The plan is to learn about the culture and heritage of Latin America, as well as seeing the cities, towns, and history. Also, we'll be doing a lot of long-distance multi-day hikes through Patagonia and the Andes. 26 years old, and we'll be quitting a well-paid job to allow for this adventure. I plan to quit in December. Super excited about this. So I just wanted to say, Adam, congrats. No small decision. Sounds like he said he's been working and prepping and saving for this for over 2 years by the time he leaves. So it's about the big picture, my friends, right? Yes, 2 years may seem like a long time, but look at the payoff there. An 18-month solo backpacking trip, and who knows where life's going to lead him after that and beyond. So congratulations. Just want to give Adam some props there. I always love to highlight people in the community taking action to create their own life of travel. One last thing before we get into the interview. I do have an exciting personal update, something that I've wanted to do I can say my whole life. I didn't know it was a thing I could do when I was born, I guess, but for a long time, finally got to do that, and I wanted to share what that was and a few lessons I learned that you can take away, just a little food for thought. So stick around after the interview for that. This conversation kicks off right away with a fascinating story on how this somewhat mythical creature we discussed came to be. You're also going to hear Dylan's amazing top 7 hidden wonders of the world list. There may be a miracle food in there. There may be some natural wonders you've never heard about. All kinds of fun stuff. So please enjoy this interview, and I will see you on the other side, my friend. Well, you got your coffee, right?
Yeah.
Tell me about that mug. It looks like there's a... Is that a jackalope? Yeah. Is that a jumping jackalope? Okay.
No, it's a real animal. It's a white-tailed deer. And I collect when we go my wife and I go someplace weird and interesting, we buy a coffee mug, which like we just have, like we break the coffee mugs, whatever, like they're just kind of in rotation. We don't keep them special, but this is from a place in Seneca, New York, which you can't really go to anymore, called the Seneca White Deer. And it's got an amazing story, actually. It was a army depot during the Cold War, and it's huge. It's gigantic. It's like, I don't know, 12,000 square acres, something. I don't know. It's gigantic. It's really big. And it was like for storing like pieces of or actual like atomic bombs. Like it was really high security. And they fenced off the entire area of this army depot. And in doing so, they trapped like this huge population of deer. And among that deer population that were now trapped inside of this fence, this is kind of like land island, a few of them had a natural genetic mutation that made them entirely white. It's not albinism, but it makes their fur white. It has a different name. And then one of the sergeants basically said, people, the soldiers were hunting on the property, and he said, okay, you can hunt the not white deer, but you can't shoot any of the white deer. And what that meant was like it created like a tiny evolutionary microcosm where there was this, this pressure on the non-white deer population, and the white deer population were not being killed by hunters. And so over time, they expanded into a herd of like a few hundred, 300, 400 white-tailed deer. And in the last couple of years, there's been this guy named Dennis Money. He signs his name with a money sign. Who's been trying to turn it into a kind of attraction and like, historical park. But it because of disputes with the landowner, because there's a different guy who owns a big piece of the land, it's sort of fallen apart. So it's like not really visitable at the moment. But for a while you could go and take like bus tours but we went up there to shoot a video about the white deer, and it's beautiful. They're amazing. They'd like emerge from the woods, these sort of like ghostly deer, and go bounding across this weird like landscape of bunkers that are all left behind. I don't know. It's awesome.
Yeah, that's wild because it definitely looked like a mythical creature or something. So it's a really fascinating story.
They look like, when we were there, it was really foggy too. So they were like hard to find, and they like emerge out of this fog. It was awesome. Yeah.
So this is this place in Seneca, New York is like it's like the Galapagos Islands of New York or something.
Yeah, or at least of that environment. And it's like that idea of sort of like a land island where a bunch of animals end up getting fenced in is like very interesting. Like, I'm not sure I could think of other examples, but I'm sure there are.
No, and it's also just this combination of, nature, but bringing in like the element of what humanity does with atomic bombs and everything, and then merging those two together. So it's like natural, but not natural,
Yeah. I mean, it does make me think a little bit about both like the DMZ and Chernobyl, which are places which have become, accidental nature preserves, and really have like now incredibly robust natural populations. So much so in the DMZ, that most of the environmental advocates around there are against demining the demilitarized zone between North Korea and South Korea, because they say it would disrupt the ecological environment too much, and then like basically like harm the animals. But yeah, really fascinating places where humans have basically like become entirely inhospitable to human life, then become extremely inviting to animal life over time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your coffee mug must be extensive because you just basically described what you do for a living. You're like,
Yeah.
I get coffee mugs. My wife and I get coffee mugs from places that we find that are, sort of interesting, obscure, if you will, places. And
Yeah.
it's like, well, okay, Dylan.
Not not every place sells a coffee mug. We break
Okay.
them, so, but yes, we got a handful. It's sad when we break one that's like really. I had a coffee mug from the Clown Motel out in Nevada, and I was sad when that broke because that was a good one.
You figured out a way to create a living just around following your curiosity, in a sense, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think my job is less glamorous than people think it is. I should say that like right out of the gate. I mean, it's like anything. There's a lot of like emails and meetings and whatever, the things that go into just like having a life. I've got little kids, so the other side of my life is filled with all the things that come with having little kids. Then my life is annoying. I live a largely normal life. I think I'm really fortunate in that. I've been doing this for 12 years now. This is the thing. This was the bet that I made when I was like 25. And I was like, okay, I'm going to like do this until it works.
Right. Well, you went all in basically.
And it worked. It took a long time, but it worked. I mean, I think it's like, I spent the first 2 years basically were unpaid. First year for sure, second year kind of, but I was still working a bunch of other jobs. And then for a while it was run as like a really tight small business in the sense. And when I mean tight, I don't mean like emotionally, although that's true too, but like tight in just the fact that like it was, it was really terrifying to try and make payroll for like 5 people at the end of a month. And that's was how we ran for like almost 3 years. And then we finally, we were able to raise money, which always sort of that does still feel slightly miraculous to me. But yeah, I mean, I feel really fortunate to get to do this work. It's really, it's a great joy of my life that this is what my, this is what pays my bills.
Yeah.
But you're doing a similar thing though.
Yes.
You're not in
Well, no, I mean, I appreciate the transparency because yes, from the outside looking in, it can be like, well, yeah, Dylan just gets to talk about all these interesting places and go to visit them and buy coffee mugs from them. And,
Yeah.
But running a business is a whole thing as we know. How has that been for you? Like, how have you changed personally, just going from owning the small business that you described to now having a major company with 60 some employees?
About that, 50 some, 55,
Yeah.
60. Yeah. It's been interesting. It's a lot of letting go, it's like a lot of letting go. You have to learn to sort of, let the thing grow on its own, because if you're successful, I think, it's like, this is such a cliched analogy, but I can already tell that it's similar in a sense to raising a child, having had a business. I haven't done it. My kids are still little, so they're still in that like small kind of cuddly phase. But like, a lot of it is learning to let the thing grow in the way it needs to grow, and also acknowledging your own, what you're not good at. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of stuff that you're people, and acknowledging what you are good at and leaning into the strengths and letting other people do the things that you're not good at, or giving, control over to someone. When we raised money, we hired a CEO. And I'd been doing everything really day to day before. And that was a hard transition for me because I was not used to not making every single decision. I mean, me and my business partner, but he, he was more remote.
Must have been kind of nice though. You're like, all right, finally, I don't have to make every single decision.
It eventually was nice. At first it was not nice. It was hard. But it was definitely the right thing to do. It was like 100%, you know what I mean? I think it would never, had I sort of stayed in the mode that I needed to do everything, I would have burned myself out. I like couldn't have both like had children and run the company the way I was running. It just wouldn't have worked. So it was good. It was the right thing to do. But I think it's a complicated, it's a living organ thing, you know, and any business comes with like both joy and sort of pain as just part of the process. So
Yeah, it's definitely helpful too, like you said, to develop an awareness around your limitations in many ways, right? And then to acknowledge them. That's why I think, you know, travel and entrepreneurship, for me at least, are probably the two biggest sort of accidental self-development tools in my life in some way, right? Like I didn't go into it being like, I'm going to use travel and entrepreneurship as to develop myself as a person, but sneakily, it just, you're kind of confronted with a lot of things.
They force your hand.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So,
and you're just like doing the things that you got to do to be a person. Yeah, no, I've had the same experience. How did you stumble into doing all the stuff that you're doing? What was your sort of process?
yeah, well, for me, it was just getting so excited about hearing all the different ways you could travel when I was traveling around the world, and then just wanting to share that with people. You know, having the conversations in the hostel where someone's like, "Oh yeah, I'm doing this, or I'm working on yachts, or all these." And I'm like, this is like blowing my mind right now that you can, not have a lot of money and still see the world. And I felt like people had to know this, and so then it was just it's similar to you. I think it's just I was compelled to share the stories, if you will, and stories, what life is all about, right? And this is what makes the world an interesting place. I know you've got some to share today. Before we kind of get into the list, because we are going to do this. I know you came with a list of the top 7 hidden wonders of the world, and you have your new book, Atlas Obscura, a food adventurer's guide, which is really cool. It's a whirlwind tour, should mention, of more than 500 unexpected dishes, unique ingredients, and fascinating culinary traditions from around the world. So we decided, this will be really cool to make this list. You've written about or been to tons of these places. Obviously, you have Atlas Obscura, one of the biggest websites out there, I think, in travel. And, taking one of those from each continent and then pairing them with a culinary curiosity from the new book. Thought that would be really fun. Before we get into it, I just had a couple things I wanted to ask you. I wanted to ask about your recent internal review and update of your database to ensure, I'm using quotes here, to ensure the platform reflects less of a Western gaze and helps to decolonize travel and provide richer narratives. I think this is really important, and I wanted to hear why you guys came to that decision and what that sort of looks like from a practical standpoint.
Yeah, I think it's a process that's still undergoing, and I think is a kind of forever process in a way. And I think it comes with two parts. One part, we just looked at our database, and we, even now, there's like an acknowledgement that we still are very heavily skewed towards the Western world. And that's largely because we're an English language site. I mean, that has a huge impact, obviously. And so we need to think about, it's not that we could never not, it's a possibility that we won't always be only an English language site, but I also think we felt like that skewing also meant that a lot of the perspectives on the site were sometimes from Westerners, that we had stuff written about places that was written by travelers, which is fine and good. And travelers have a really interesting perspective of their own, which we want, but that sometimes those stories weren't as full as they should have been. You know what I mean? That there was something that was sort of left out and never really maliciously, but there was one process just sort of auditing what was in the site and looking at language, looking at, any places that we've sort of said, is this a place that we are sure we want to list, or is it framed in the right way? An interesting example in the US is just all the plantations in the South, right? Which sometimes are framed as like just like great, beautiful, it's like where people go to get married and stuff. And it's like, look at all the beautiful willow trees, and there's sites of terrible atrocities in American history. And so you just need to acknowledge that. It's not that there's not something, important to say about them, or that you shouldn't go visit them. But sort of giving their full context is really important. So some of it was just making sure that we were doing that in all the places we needed to. And then there's this other part of it, which is a bigger, longer process. But, in its ideal version, Atlas Obscura is not from a Western traveler to another Western traveler. In its ideal version, Atlas Obscura is not just, one Western traveler writing to another Western traveler. The best places we get into the site are from locals, are from people saying there's this thing, 20 minutes outside of my town that is amazing, that people should go see and no one knows about it. And it's like a shame because it deserves to be celebrated. And so the big process that I would like us to work on, and I mean, we're in the midst of it, is just expanding that coverage. I mean, we live in a world now where anyone can do kind of work from wherever they are. And it doesn't really, I mean, that was just been true for a long time in a way, but so we just want to, I would love to have people who are in rural, Kazakhstan, in rural parts of China, in, I would love to be getting entries from people truly, truly, truly all over the world. And so how you do that, it's a complicated question, but it's, it's something we're starting to kind of work on.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of bring that up and let people know that was happening, because I think that's really important. And also, it's not every organization that has the awareness and will take the time to do something like that, and to ask those questions, and to think about how a story is framed and what's included and what needs to be there and what's missing and all that kind of stuff. Never easy answers, but just the fact that you guys are diving into those questions is important.
And our strong feeling is that like the full story is the most interesting story. Our strong feeling is that the richest story, the fullest story, is the one that has the most interesting details. It's the one that makes you really understand a place. And when you have stuff that's left out or kind of glided over, it doesn't do it justice. So
right, getting the complete narrative, right?
Yeah, which is complicated.
I imagine that this list is packed with some stories, so we should probably get into. I love these lists because I don't know them in advance, so I get to learn along with everybody listening. And you have this amazing perspective, being the co-founder of Atlas Obscura, and just having all this knowledge in your head. And I'm really curious, what is Dylan going to pull out of all of this like massive database you guys have and your personal experiences and put on this list? So we did it continent by continent. I know this is not the end all be all, this could change next week, but totally subjective, but a lot of fun, right? A lot of fun.
This is me, how I'm feeling at this particular moment, but it still will be a good list.
It's funny when I put these lists together myself, we'll do these things. I take them so seriously, like anybody cares by ranking. You know what I mean? It's just put in my head. I'm like, oh, should this be number one? I don't know. Where should I put this one here? Oh no, that one's not good. Anyway. All right. So I pulled up the continents in alphabetical order. I thought we could just go continent by continent. You're going to share one of your favorite destinations or sites from each continent, what do you love about it, and then pair that with one of these culinary curiosities from the new book. So can we start in Asia? Does that sound like a good plan for you?
Sure. Yeah, and I think there's so many ways to do this. I mean, one thing I could do is there's some places where the food curiosity and the place kind of blend into one. So in Asia, I might actually go ahead and do that, which is there's a place that is quite touristy. It's quite popular, but it also is still one of these places that is truly unique in the world. And it has a really interesting food angle, which is Mount Hua, which is this sacred mountain in China, 7,000 feet at the top. 7,000 feet above sea level. And at the top is this lovely little tea house where you can get a cup of tea and sit and look out over the mountains. But to get there, you have to go on what a lot of people call one of the most dangerous hikes in the world. And you can take a gondola up for like the first half of the trip up the mountain. But then you basically have to walk along this kind of pilgrimage route, which is these planks bolted to the side of this mountain. And what's weird about this is not only is it sort of genuinely dangerous, people fall to their death every year, but it's also quite popular. So it's weirdly touristy. So it's one of these things where you're like, and I find this actually very interesting. Like I find the real version of this more interesting than the kind of idealized version. You see a lot of the idealized version, but in reality, like you go, you have to wait in a long line, whatever. And then you're like in this group of people walking this plank walk, but you are also, 1,000 feet like to your left is death. And then you're hooked into these little chains, these little things that are supposed to keep you from falling. But because there's two-way traffic, people are like often unbuckling themselves so they can go around each other. And then you'll get to this spot on this, on this mountain pass where like crammed up against the wall is a guy who's sitting there with like a camera, a a printer, and a laminator so that he can take your photo and laminate a photo of you like while you're like on the side of this mountain. And the whole thing is just this kind of weirdly bizarre conglomeration of like modern tourism, ancient Chinese tradition, Taoist tea ceremony, Taoist tea tradition, and I find it very interesting and fascinating. And so that's a really unusual kind of food destination in Asia. Of course, there's like Asia's a big place,
Right?
So
yeah, I know.
It's a lot of stuff we can put in there.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, if you. I would put Turkmenistan squarely in Asia, and obviously the gates of hell are in Turkmenistan. That's a like perennial favorite. It's a giant burning hole in the Turkmenistan desert that's been on fire for 50 years, and is the result of an industrial accident. Basically, a giant drilling rig fell in to this, set up there to drill natural gas, collapsed in, made this chasm, and then these Soviet petroleum geologists who were doing this in the early 1970s decided to set the hole on fire so that it wasn't leaking natural gas everywhere. And it's been burning for 50 years.
Really?
So
Wow.
that's a great one. The Gates of Hell is an absolute classic. Not really a food angle, although I've heard of people going there and like trying to roast marshmallows over
Right.
it. But
Okay.
it's also like releases a lot of gas, so I wouldn't eat the marshmallows after you've roasted them anyway.
Right. Wow. That sounds. I have to look that up after this. Listen, it's a travel podcast, so honorable mentions are more than welcome. Dylan.
Yeah. Okay.
We want to hear the more the merrier. All right, let's move over to Africa.
Yeah. Okay. So this one is two separated places. And one of them, it's a little bit of a cheat, but it's because it's sort of in Africa and sort of not, because it's off the coast of the Horn of Africa. And it's a place that I learned about maybe 10 years ago, called the Milky Seas. And it's, for hundreds of years, maybe even thousands, there were accounts of sailors sailing through areas that they would say were basically a glowing sea from horizon to horizon. That they would enter these periods of these areas where they could see nothing but the water glowing up. And for a long time, there was no. I mean, it's even mentioned in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Jules Verne's book. This idea of these Milky Seas, and there wasn't really any scientific evidence that this existed, and it was kind of chalked up to sailors, tall tales or at least exaggerations. And then in 2006 at a conference, there was basically there's a marine biologist who was talking to an oceanic satellite expert, and they started wondering if you could see bioluminescence from space. And the conclusion was almost certainly no. There's just no way. But the satellite expert, a guy named Steve Miller, who I've interviewed a couple of times about this, has decided to go back and just for funsies kind of look. And so started on the internet and was just Googling and found a report from the 90s of a ship called the SS Lima that said it had sailed through a Milky Sea. And, it was a modern ship, so it had exact coordinates. So they knew where it was when it was reporting this. And he pulled up satellite data, and it turns out there was satellite data for that patch of ocean on a really perfect night with no moon, very little cloud cover. And he took this image and he sort of started he really did one of these things that you see in the movies where he's like, enhance. Like he had to run it through a bunch of stuff to bring out the contrast. And when he did this, the image emerged this picture of a patch of ocean the size of Connecticut that was glowing. And this was the first confirmation of this, the existence of the Milky Seas. And when I talked to him years ago, it was kind of frustrating because at that point, the satellites weren't really good enough. This was just a lucky hit, but it was almost impossible to figure out, where another Milky Sea was going to be and to get the satellite data to confirm it. So he spent the next many years, like really 10 years, basically training, like figuring out algorithms for satellites so that they could filter out something called air glow, which is like there's this glowing layer of the atmosphere. It's not like the Northern Lights. It's this other thing that's constant. But like satellites have to look through it, and how they could figure out to discount reflections of clouds on the ocean, all this stuff, all this interference. And he very recently, basically, they figured it out. The satellite technology has advanced enough where now they just saw for the first time, they were basically able to confirm another example of the Milky Sea. This one's off the coast of Java. But the first one was off the coast of the Horn of Africa. And many of them seem to be off the coast of the Horn of Africa. And now they think that they're actually going to be able to confirm them in real time, that they'll be able to sort of start to spot them. And then the next step is to actually send like a team of scientists out while they're happening, because they can last for weeks and weeks. And so the fact that there's this phenomena of bioluminescence on the scale of, states happening that we basically don't understand. We don't really know how it works. They're still not totally certain how that many bacteria can even come together and do this all at once. There's this thing called quorum sensing involved, where once the bacteria know that there's enough other bacteria, they start to glow. But it's very mysterious. And the fact that this sort of exists in our world and we're just barely scratching the surface of it, to me, is like a really wonderful example of how much there is sort of still to discover. So, and it's just beautiful. And talking to Steve, the scientist, about how excited he is to have this is his life's work, to have confirmed this, to maybe, he's like a living scientist, go and take a boat out and sail it into one of these Milky Seas is really cool. So that's my place.
Like his own personal Atlantis in some ways, right?
Yeah, truly. But it's there. It's real. It happens in the world. And so so that's one that I love, that story. And then on the food side, I'm going to choose one that's just really fun, which is something called the miracle berry. And that is a small red berry. Tastes a little bit like a lesser cranberry, but it's from West Africa, and it's not from we have it in the book on Atlas Obscura in Burkina Faso, but you can find it in a number of countries. But it tricks your taste buds so that things that taste sour suddenly taste sweet. And people in West Africa have been using the berry for hundreds, probably thousands of years, before they would eat sort of sour bread or sour wine, to kind of give it this much improved flavor. And in the 70s, there was a scientist who wanted to use these miracle berries to potentially kind of replace sugar. And there's this whole thing about how he was trying to do this. He said he was being tailed, and then his office got broken into. And then sort of shortly after this, miracle berries, the FDA put them on as a kind of special type of ingredient, which means that it's really hard to use them in food as an additive in any way. And that's been true since the 70s. And so they're kind of, because of that, they're sort of this novelty. No one's ever been able to do the real work to actually see if there's a way to use them as a sugar replacement. But they're really fun. You can order them on the internet. You can get them freeze dried or as little tablets. And me and my son, who's 6, ate these, and then we tried lemons, and the lemons are really sweet. They're delicious. Actually, you could eat a whole lemon just like it was an orange. Sour cream tastes like whipped cream basically, and there's this whole. It's like they're really fun. They're really an interesting sort of sensory experience.
Yeah, that's wild because you're using it as a conduit to experience other foods, right? In some ways,
Yeah.
and it sounds like something straight out of Willy Wonka's factory, right?
Totally,
Like
100%.
clickable wallpaper. Take some miracle berries here. You know?
Yeah. No, that is what they're like. It's wild.
Okay, so for those out there that are like, hey, that wasn't an alphabetical order, I just realized we started with Asia, went to Africa. Yes, not exactly in alphabetical order, sorry. But we're going to move to Antarctica now. Curious what you have for this one.
Sure. So separate again. And in Antarctica, my favorite place is a place called Blood Falls. And it's a little bit similar maybe to Milky Seas in the sense that it's got sort of a scientific mystery or a scientific surprise wrapped up in it. But Blood Falls is what it sounds like. It's a more than 3-story tall, frozen blood red waterfall leaking out of the side of this glacier. And it's way remote. It's way, way, way out there. But scientists were super curious about like what this was, what was happening. Is it iron? Is it what? And what it turns out to be is that this glacier, millions of years ago, trapped a body of water. It's a little bit like the Seneca deer, actually, but microbial. This glacier trapped a body of water underneath it. And inside of that were some kind of ancient microbes. And they evolved to be able to eat essentially what was available to them. And what was available to them was iron. They basically eat iron. And their whole like energy system comes off of this like of pulling iron apart in certain ways and then depositing other bits of it. And the science of this I'm doing a poor job of explaining. But what it does is it creates this this like blood red water that then there's a fissure and then is leaking out slowly. And so they're able to actually sample this and like learn more. These are real kind of extremophile bacteria that have been on their own evolutionary path for millions of years, kind of isolated. And so, yeah, it's a site. It's a big science site. It's a weird. I mean, NASA was interested in these because they're an example of how alien life might actually like live. They live in such an extreme environment and yet have found this really novel way of surviving. So that one is just awesome. The food one is unexpected. People eat so well in Antarctica. If you are on one of the big bases, they have hired a really top-notch chef. They have brought in as many good ingredients as they can. And at the start of the year, you have a lot of what they call freshies or just fresh vegetables. And then as things go on, they run out, and things get a little more monotonous. But some of the big greenhouses, like the Great Wall base, has a really functional year-round greenhouse that they can eat fresh vegetables all year. So they're kind of like the envy of the others. But if you're like, say you're on the Concordia base, that's run by Italy and France. So you're eating like, chicken parm and foie gras and it really is like a fancy menu. Like it's really because there's so little variance in anything else in Antarctica. And these scientists, it's like a hard job they have. It's freezing out. It's the same every day. But I mean, it's just like, so the food becomes a really important part of moral support. And so the bases put a lot of effort and money into their food. So there's not exactly one dish. You could go back and choose something from Shackleton's time, pemmican, sort of this like beef jerky, but I'm more interested in the fact that like, yeah, you can eat really, really well if you're on a base in Antarctica. And it's obviously like tons of people get those. Speaking of interesting, weird ways to travel, a lot of people get jobs working in the kitchens at like McMurdo and other stations because it's a huge part of the process, the effort,
Yeah, I love that. It's just sort of unexpected. You think, oh, I'm all the way down here on the frozen continent. I'm eating a Michelin star meal or something. It's just
Totally.
not what you expect.
And I think for like an up and coming chef, it's a really interesting challenge. Like spend a year in Antarctica, like trying to like make stuff that's gonna like delight the scientists working down here. There's bars, like all these bases have their own bars. The Ukrainian station has a bar with like I think it's I'd have to check this. Verdansky has, I think, um maybe bras or something all over. It's like surprisingly anyway, they're like really, it's a little bit more of a weird party culture and like fine dining than anyone would imagine for Antarctica.
Wild. There's some chef out there listening right now. It's booking his ticket or her ticket right now.
Yeah.
It's awesome. All right. Let's move over to Oceania, I guess they call it now. Not just Australia, but as what would be Eurasia, New Zealand, sort of that area.
Yeah. Yeah. So, again, it's like choosing anything at the continent level is wild because it's like there's so much to choose from.
Yeah, it's a ridiculous task that I've given you.
But we're gonna
we all
try.
know that.
We're gonna try. We're gonna do it. So for place, I'm gonna choose another one of my longtime favorites, called the Mari Man. So in the outback of Australia, where there are these just sort of small towns, indigenous settlements, it's pretty remote and pretty rough living in a lot of ways. And a lot of stuff gets delivered by plane out there. And one day in the late 90s, a plane was flying over the desert. And it did this run regularly. So, the pilot was accustomed to the landscape and what he was seeing. And he looked down and he saw something that hadn't been there before. In the desert was carved one of the largest geoglyphs, so a giant drawing in the dirt, that has ever been made, called the Mari Man. And it wasn't there the year before. Someone mysteriously, in the night, we don't really know, went out to the desert and carved a multi-mile long drawing of an Aboriginal sort of warrior holding this kind of traditional weapon, this stick weapon. But weirdly, it's like wrong. You can like looking at it, people were very quickly like, oh, this almost certainly wasn't made by the indigenous Aboriginals here, because this drawing isn't quite correct in a number of ways. And the interesting thing is, to do this drawing, you almost would have to have GPS, which barely existed at this point. You almost would have to have there was a military base nearby, American military base, and they almost definitely would have had access to GPS. So there's a lot of conjecture that this was carved by American soldiers. But why? And also, like, there's no one's ever come forward to claim it. And so now the Mari Man has become this kind of interesting, and there's like a lot of follow-on debate. There was some back and forth between two different indigenous groups, one who wanted to keep it, one who wanted to erase it because they felt that it was sort of a desecration of sacred land. Then there's like local bar owners who have sort of made it their like mascot. And now it's like people come to this area just to take a flight to see the Mari Man. So there's all this like additional drama that happens afterwards. But basically in the Australian desert is one of the largest pieces of figurative art in the world. And we still have no idea who made it. It is an absolute mystery of who made it, exactly how they made it, why they made it. So that's one that I really love. I think, and then I'm just grabbing the book here and then on the food side, Australia's an interesting one because it's so much of the indigenous Aboriginal food culture was absolutely destroyed by British colonialists. And so it's got, in a way, a kind of like shallow food history. You know what I mean? Like in a lot of places, and I mean, there's some places where that's less true, but Australia is still sort of establishing what exactly Australian cuisine really is. And so the thing that there's this train that you can take from the top of Australia to the bottom of Australia. And it stops along the way, and sort of you can sample like each area of Australia's different food styles, including indigenous styles in the outback. And so you're getting like sheep up in the north, and then it's like kangaroo down as you go farther south. And it's called the Gone Train, the historic Gone Train. And so it starts in Darwin and goes to Adelaide. So you're doing a kind of straight through the middle of Australia trip. And then you get to kind of, see the full country. You get to see the really remote part of the country, but because you're on a train, you're not in danger of like your car breaking down and you dying in the sun. And you get to eat all different sorts of kind of regional cuisine. And so I think that's really, really interesting. I think the other thing that's happening, more in the cities of Australia, but is the reintroduction of traditional indigenous Aboriginal cuisine is kind of coming back. Restaurants are being opened. There's various projects around to kind of preserve and promote indigenous cuisine, indigenous ingredients. So I think that's really interesting because it's bringing back a part of like food culture to Australia that was basically suppressed for the last few hundred years. And so
Awesome. Yeah, who made that drawing? If anybody knows, get in touch.
Yeah.
Hey, you got to throw it out there. You never know. All right, we're moving over to Europe now.
What do I want to do in Europe? This is a good question. I think there is so much. Can you choose a country?
Yeah, I mean, I could. Yeah.
Let me. No, you can't. No, don't choose a country. I'll choose something. I mean, I lived in Hungary, in Budapest, for a year. So I'm going to talk about a food that is actually completely bog standard normal in Hungary and in much of the world, but is slept on by America, which is really simple food, which is fat on bread. And instead of butter, it's basically lardo. It's pieces of pork fat that are like melted or softened and then spread on bread. And you usually put red onion or some other kind of vegetables on it, and it's absolutely delicious. It's just like it's like a real country standard sort of like it's not fancy. It's like country village fare in Hungary, and so
is it one of those things that sort of people ate just to survive as part of thing, and now it's become more appreciated, I guess?
I mean, I think it's just been around forever. It's really their version of bread and butter, and I think we, for whatever reason, yeah, it's bread and butter, but just like a different source of animal fat, really, and for whatever reason, Americans, we used to work with lard a lot more, but like have sort of, at some period of like health craze, decided that we should eat Crisco instead, which is like so much worse for you than lard actually is. And so, lard, eating kind of straight animal fat is a lot more, and cooking with it is a lot more present in Europe and Eastern Europe, particularly. So that is a food that I like and miss.
That's great, man. Yeah. Is there a site maybe in Eastern Europe then that you've come to?
Yeah, I was going to choose something from our travels around there. So I think, this is a pretty famous one, but there's just nothing like it in the world. So we're going to go to the Czech Republic, to a town called Kutná-Hora, and we're going to visit the Bone Church, which is like quite internationally well known at this point, but is really worth a stop if you're in the area. It's an example. There are a number of these around the world, especially throughout Europe. But of an ossuary, which is a place where tons of bones have been taken and stacked and arranged in an interesting way. So obviously the French catacombs are probably the most famous and touristy example of this. But there's other ones, especially all over Eastern Europe, sometimes much lesser known. But the thing that makes Sedlitz Ossuary, is what this church is called, so unique and incredible, is just the scale of it and the sort of artistry of it. So you walk down into this church space, and the entire place is decorated in bone. So there's a bone chandelier with bone sort of garlands coming off of it. There are these pyramid stacks of bones kind of kept behind bars, so I guess people don't mess with them. There are, all these like ornate pillars are there to hold skulls and angel sculptures, but also surrounded by skulls. And it's just like, it is a totally different relationship with death than America has. And most of the Western world has, but in sort of the older, traditions of Catholicism, there was a real idea of kind of looking death in the face, this memento mori idea. That, sort of acknowledging that we too will become bone, that we too will become dust. It was like an important part of religious experience, of thinking about God. And so this Sedlitz was, this whole region was like very important. The graveyard of this church was important because very early on, dirt from the Holy Land, dirt from Jerusalem was brought back. And it made it like the most desirous place to get buried, which the problem was, of course, that they ran out of room. It's not that big a cemetery. So they had to constantly unearth old remains to put in new remains. And the old remains would get added to and stacked in this church. And they were all arranged by a woodcarver in the 1800s. And it's amazing. There's not much else like it. There's a lot of incredible ossuaries in Italy that you can visit as well. But I chose this one because it's just like I have a plaster skull. In that case, I didn't get a coffee cup. I got a plaster skull.
Okay.
And so I still treasure my plaster skull from Sedlitz Ossuary.
Man, talk about a visual representation of death right in your face. Just a bone church.
Yeah. Have you ever been to any ossuaries?
No.
Oh man, you got to go. You're not that far from some. I mean, Scandinavia has its own history of ossuaries. I'm trying to think where I could send you. I'll have to check, but I'm pretty sure there are some examples. Are there any examples in Norway? Maybe in Sweden. I'll take a look and I'll send you. But you're not far away from an ossuary. You're much closer to an ossuary than I am. There are basically no ossuaries in America, unfortunately.
We won't expect those then for our next two destinations. That's North America and South America. We're finishing with the Americas.
Yeah. I'll go fast. I'm taking a long time to do these, but I'll speed up. Okay.
I mean, listen, this is what it's all about, right? The backgrounds and the stories. So
So North America. I will go to Bishop's Castle in Colorado. It is way out on a back road in kind of the mountains of Colorado. And it's the singular project of a guy named Jim Bishop. And he, 30 years ago, got it into his head that he wanted to build a castle. So, stone by stone, pretty much single-handedly, he began building an enormous medieval style castle. And if you pull up on this place today, you are greeted by a 16-story tall stone castle with wrought iron bridges, hand welded. There's a dragon at the top of the castle that can be made to breathe fire using like acetylene, like torch style, whatever. And I went in winter, and when I went in winter, he wasn't there, but you're supposed to sign a form that basically says, if I accidentally fall to my death, it's my fault, not yours. But it's one of these places where like you can go. I explored it. There was no one there. I explored it on my own. It's open to the public. And it is genuinely feels a little bit like I went up to the top and walked across some of these like steel, these welded steel bridges. And man, you are like, oh, like this is real sketchy. Like it is definitely a place where you feel like, oh, I am taking my life into my own hands, but in the best way, in the best possible way. And it's just incredible that one person made this. It's an example of a whole kind of type of structure, these self-built outsider art structures that happen all over the world, but are, a big part of what Atlas Obscura like celebrates is people who just sort of say, this is the thing I'm going to do. This is the thing I'm going to do with my whole life. I'm going to build this, giant sculpture garden in the forest of India. I'm going to make this 16-story tall castle in the mountains of Colorado. And so that is a place that will never disappoint. I think it's impossible to go there and be like, this was not cool. It's crazy.
Yeah. Isn't it? I don't know. It's always inspiring to me when there's this guy like Jim Bishop, somebody out there that gets this idea in their head that makes no sense for the modern world, really. I mean, it's not really to accomplish anything other than to kind of create something that's in their head and sort of, I don't know what it is, contribute it to the world, but it's like you said, it's so far out in the middle of nowhere. So, but then dedicate your life to it. It's so inspiring.
Yeah, I agree. I am sort of obsessed with obsession and with people who dedicate their lives to these incredible projects that often don't deliver like great monetary rewards, and they're hard and they're like, and I think we'll see what happens with Jim Bishop in a lot of these cases. When the creator dies, it's very hard for the places to survive. And one of the things that Atlas sort of aims to do actually is that by increasing kind of tourism interest in these kinds of places, you increase the likelihood that they'll stick around, because at the local or state level, they actually say, oh, you know what, though, this is like a tourism asset. Like we got to figure out how to keep this from falling to pieces or getting, bulldozed or whatever. I mean, Jim Bishop's castle is like definitely not to code. You know what I mean? It's it's way outside of code. But that's a cool place. And then on the food one, I'm going to go home. I'm going to go to Minnesota, where I grew up. And I could cite a bunch of stuff. I could cite, like I grew up, I'm Scandinavian, my family's Scandinavian. So we brought a lot of that food with us, and like a few generations back. And so I ate a lot of pickled herring, a lot of lefse, and of course, Ljudifisk.
Yes.
Which, have you ever had Ljudifisk?
Yes, I had a weird experience with that. Not my favorite. Let's say. It was paired with coffee. Okay, I'll just start there.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, no, it wasn't interesting. It was terrible.
Well, yeah. So Ljudifisk is dried fish, which is then rehydrated by soaking it in lye, which makes it poisonous. And then you have to wash the lye out with repeated water rinses. And you're ended up with this fish jelly, this strongly smelling fish jelly. And it's funny because it's much more popular in like Minnesota and Wisconsin than it is in Scandinavia. Like people in Scandinavia basically like don't really eat it anymore, or not much. Obviously, you've had some, so someone's eating it. But it's not that. It's more common in these Scandinavian families in the Midwest. So that's a great one, and I cite it often as an example. Sometimes people sort of want to look at the new book Gastro Obscura, and they're like, "So this is all about weird foods," and it's like sort of, but weird is entirely and 100% relative. You know what I mean? So if you grew up eating Ljudifisk, it's not that weird. But another Midwestern delight that maybe I'll choose as my real example is, and that you haven't had a terrible experience with, is the butter sculpture at the Minnesota State Fair. So every year there's a little booth where the contestants for Princess K of the Milky Way sit and get their heads carved in 90-pound blocks of butter. And this has been going on for decades. In fact, it dates back to a really old tradition of a woman who sort of became a butter carving star in the 1800s. She carved butter in front of like an auditorium of 2,000 people. But you can find this at not just the Minnesota State Fair. I think the Iowa State Fair does it. A couple other state fairs do butter carving now. And it also, it's not the only place in the world where this happens. There's a big Tibetan butter carving tradition too, but it's a monastery tradition. Tibetan monks carve these incredible sculptures out of yak butter, and they color them with mineral pigments, and they make these like beautiful sort of profoundly complex, colorful things that are then fed back to the yaks at the end of the celebration. And so anyway, so I like those are some North American things, butter carving and giant self-built castles.
Yeah, I love that you brought it back to Minnesota. I mean, you're from Minnesota, so Minnesota nice. It all makes sense now.
Yeah.
You know? No, it's funny. I love that you picked Lludifisk, and I'm in Scandinavia, and we went to Minnesota for that. That's awesome. Yeah. And my memories of the Minnesota State Fair many years ago were the baby races. There were baby races. They had literally like lanes set up where babies would race. There was it at Minnesota? I saw the mutton humping. Maybe that was another one where kids ride like sheep, like rodeo sheep. I don't know. That might have been
possible, my state. But that feels like
that might have been Kansas.
I don't know if I've ever seen.
That might have been Kansas. Yeah.
That feels like a Kansas. It's slightly more Western than Minnesota in its style. Yeah.
Yeah, some of the state fairs are blending together for me at some point.
They're similar.
I went to a lot of them, yeah. But one great meal I had in Minnesota outside of a venue when I was working as a tour manager for a band, they had a restaurant where you could pick like a mystery dish. I forget what the name of the restaurant was. And it was legit, like you weren't allowed to return it, you know? And I just loved that they put that on the menu because I've eaten at a lot of places. I've never seen a restaurant actually have a mystery dish where, hey, you have to order it, and if you order, you don't have to order it, but if you order it, you
just get what you get.
Yeah, it is what it is. So I ordered it, and I was very happy. Cool. It was meatloaf and mashed potatoes. I was very happy. You know, I was like, yeah, when it came, but it was like that kind of like, oh, is this going to be good? If it's not, this is going to be a long night. You know.
Yeah.
So that was kind of fun.
Totally.
All right, so we'll head down South America. Last pit stop here on this wild hidden wonders of the world list.
Yeah. Okay, so South America, I have to go to one of my favorite places that I've ever been to. Maybe we've talked about it before even. We're going to go to the Quechua, or what's sometimes called the Last Incan Bridge. This is about 3 hours south of Machu Picchu. And instead of being completely overrun with people, it's generally, at least when I was there, which is quite a while ago now, maybe you'll see a couple of other people come through, but the Quechua is a suspension bridge over a gorge with a river running below it. It's a big suspension bridge. It's like 70 feet across maybe. And what makes it so unique are two things. One, it's entirely woven out of grass. And so it's made out of this kind of hay material that grows in the area. And that material is woven into little pieces of twine, and those are woven into pieces of rope. And eventually the rope is woven into these big cables that make up the big supports of the bridge. But because it's woven out of grass, it has to be cut down every year and rewoven because it starts to rot, basically. So every year, this bridge is remade in this big ceremony in the summer where the 4 villages come together. Every household is responsible for a certain amount of twine, and they remake this bridge year after year. The other reason it's spectacular, and the bridge is incredibly strong, by the way. It's scary to walk across because it's a suspension bridge and it sways as you walk, and as it goes on in the year, it gets slightly more dilapidated. So like it starts off with these sticks as kind of the floor of it, but then they start to kind of tilt and slide. But that said, it can hold like 50 people comfortably. It's really a strong bridge. But the other reason it's amazing is that it's been made the exact same way since the Incan Empire. This is a little surviving piece of Incan infrastructure. And it's made the same way today as it was 500 years ago, 600 years ago. And it's still overseen by a bridge master who's basically a descendant of the first bridge master. And so it's this kind of astonishing piece of cultural history. And they don't need it anymore. There's a steel bridge that trucks can go across and stuff, just like a mile away. You can see it basically from the rope bridge. But it's just this incredible feat. And I loved being there. I've never been able to go down during the actual celebration, but I would really like to return and partake in building the bridge.
Yeah, that's incredible. And thinking about how, knowledge being passed down, but then you have this, again, visual representation of that, where it's like, okay, wow, this isn't just, theoretical. These people are passing down this knowledge from generation to generation and keeping this tradition going and alive.
Well, and if you think about it, the Incans in particular were masters of fiber. They were sort of on before they were very rudely interrupted. They were like the Roman Empire. I mean, they were this vast, sprawling empire with a road system, thousands, like 1,500 kilometers long across South America, running up and down, collecting taxes. And the way, the tax keepers use this quipo system to basically keep track of all of the census data of towns and keep track of taxes. And a lot of what the Incans did was advanced and sort of innovative, uses of fiber as a technology. And so the bridge is an interesting example of sort of that same technological progression. There's this really sort of ridiculous thing about like, well, they never invented the wheel. Totally false. The wheel was fully invented. They had the wheel. They knew what the wheel was. They had toys with the wheel, but they were living in a mountainous environment where having a wheel is basically useless. What they didn't have is explosives. If they had explosives, I'm sure they would have gladly blasted flat, roads and switched to a wheeled system with llamas pulling carts or something. But it made absolutely no sense to use a wheel in that environment. So it was all systems of stairs, bridges, running paths that were used as the communication and transfer system. So I love to sort of think about what different kinds of systems and technological systems sort of developed and how they might have developed sort of had they been left in isolation. Anyway.
Yeah.
And then the food is
yes. We need the food. How are you going to pick a food? Jeez.
Yeah. There's a million, but I'm going to we're in Peru, so I'm going to kind of stay in Peru. And I'm going to pick guinea pig, which I've eaten. It's delicious. It's sort of served usually in a kind of roasted. And I'm going to pick an example. This has been going on for a really long time. And part of the reason we know it's been going on for a really long time is there's a painting from the 1700s, the 1730s. And it's a very traditional Catholic painting of the Last Supper, because obviously by this time, Spain has fully colonized Peru and much of South America. And so Catholicism is everywhere. But in this painting of the Last Supper, which is exquisite and beautiful, on the table being served is a roast guinea pig, as a sort of note, as a nod to traditional foods. And there might have been kind of a bit of a subversive context to it as well. Here, I'll show it to you. It's kind of great.
Oh yeah.
This is, if you look closely.
Nice.
And so, it's just an example of a kind of, and what's funny is now long seen as kind of a, maybe a peasant food. It's really become sort of elevated, and guinea pig is showing up in kind of the fancy restaurants in Lima these days. Like a lot of, this is a story, an old story, which is like a sort of uncool, lowbrow peasant food, gets elevated. But it's good. Guinea pig is good. Long tradition of eating it across Peru, and yeah. So I think that's my choice.
Incredible. I think it's safe to say that this list was epic, in my opinion. That
Thanks.
was incredible.
The problem is we could start again right now.
Oh,
You
yeah.
could just go back and I would just choose different stuff. I would choose different things for every continent all over again because I'm just, whatever. It's like there's a loose soup of 10 million things in my head. So.
I'm going to be hitting you up to come back on the Zero to Travel podcast again. So we got plenty of list fodder coming your way, maybe. I hope at least we see if we can get you on. I appreciate your time.
Of course.
I wanted to ask you, with all your work with Atlas Obscura and everything you've been exposed to, I mean, has that at all, how has that, if at all, changed sort of your perception of your place in the world as an individual?
I mean, the whole kind of mission of Atlas Obscura is to give people this sense of surprise and wonder of what is in the world, of what is possible in the world. And I think it's, having done it for a long time now, what's nice about it is to be reminded regularly of how little I know, of how little I know about the world, how little I've seen, how little I've done, and that diversity, that pluralism of the world is truly beautiful. And I think, we live in a time where all of our connectedness can make the world feel really small. And the world is not small. The world is enormous. It is filled with more than you could ever imagine. And so I think that that's a nice thing to keep in mind. It's a nice counterpoint to what can be a really cynical, really, really, we live in a pretty dark time in some ways. I mean, we're living through a pandemic. We are facing true, potential catastrophe in the form of climate change. And yet also true at that same moment is that the world continues to be profoundly beautiful, spectacular, filled with strange, interesting people, fascinating history, and so, I try and keep those things in my head at once, because I think it's when you sort of give up on the second part, the world shrinks and becomes very, very kind of crushing. But to know that so that world is out there, that big world, that wonder-filled world is out there, I think provides us an important counterpoint to all that other stuff.
It's a great perspective for daily life. You want to hit everybody with all the details of where they should go and what they should get and all that good stuff.
Yeah. Jason's catching me early in the morning, so I first off apologize for my crusty, confused interview style. Second off,
fantastic.
Everything is on atlasobscura.com. If you want to know what we're up to, you should go there. We publish books. We got our Atlas Obscura book. Most recently, we got a kid's book. Most recently, I co-authored a book called Gastro Obscura, all about the culinary wonders of the world. Check that out. If you want to really go hard with us, we run trips all over the world in 2022. Knock on wood, barring complete disasters, as we've had over the last couple of years, we'll be running something like 165 trips all around the world, taking groups of like 12 to 18 people to many of the places I've described and talked about. We go to a lot of these locations that I've mentioned, including many others that I didn't mention. And so we got that going on. So atlasobscura.com is the place to go find us. We're on Instagram. We're on Facebook,
It's one of my faves. And also, I should mention you guys have a wonderful podcast as well, which you host.
We do. Of course, I forgot the podcast.
I should mention that. Yes, I'm making my play to get on. If you guys need somebody over in Scandinavia here to go out to some exotic locations, I do have recording equipment. I'm just saying.
We run an almost daily podcast. It's 4 days a week, so Monday through Thursday. I am the host of many of those, and Jason, we might take you up on that. It's like a lot of show to make, so we're always looking for help.
Right on. Well, I appreciate your help and your time today. Thanks for running us through this. As we said, prefacing this whole thing with this list could change. In a hot second, we could re-record this and do another crazy list.
All new things. Yeah.
I mean, this was. Yeah, I just love everything you came up with here is so different and unexpected in many ways. So that's what travel's all about, right? Kind of
Totally.
fun and the unexpected. So thank you so much for your time, and we'll leave all the links in the show notes and all that good stuff. And Dylan, let's stay in touch.
Sounds good, man. Let's do it again.
Take care. There you have it. Thanks, Dylan, for stopping by the show. Can't wait to have you back again, my friends. Thank you so very much. I love how chock full of stories Dylan's head is. I wish I could just off the top of my head rattle off these super engaging, fascinating tidbits of knowledge from around the world. And it's a skill. It's a gift. And I'm excited that I have this platform to bring Dylan on to share his gift with you and to help us build our ever-growing list of things to see and do around the world. We are curious folks, aren't we, us travelers? So thanks to Dylan for stopping by. Now, I did want to share some exciting personal news. You can skip this if you don't care about my personal life. You can peace out of the podcast right now, and I'll see you next week. But if you want to hear a little bit about my weekend, please indulge me for a moment. I had one of the most thrilling and memorable moments of my life, getting to play a concert in a band to a crowd of about 120 people at a venue in Oslo. Here, I'll play a short clip from our live show. There you go. I did want to share a few lessons that I was reminded of, some things that can... they're universal lessons, really, whether you want to travel, do some other things in life. These were a few things I pulled out. I actually included this in my newsletter last week. So if you are not on the list for the newsletter, you can hear some more musings, get some travel links, get updates on all kinds of stuff going on off the podcast at zerototravel.com. Sign up over there for the newsletter. It's free. Anyway, I'll share those lessons in a second, but I just have to say it was special on so many levels because not only was it my very first time, but for half of the band, is called Laundry House. We're on Spotify and all that if you want to look it up. And it was our first time ever doing anything like this. We're all these guys that have sort of just been playing guitar or writing songs or doing our little musical hobby thing, really just kind of on our own, in our own houses, growing up individually. So finally come together with a group of people. This has been a wonderful thing to have, especially over the pandemic, to be able to share music with a group of guys, to get together once a week, to make original songs, to get to create stuff, and then to take what we've been doing for a couple years just amongst ourselves and to bring it out into the real world, where Oslo had just opened up pretty recently. This is really the first concert of the season. It was the first concert of the season for this venue, and it was just special on so many levels because, like I said, it was my first show. It was a full crowd there. People were resonating with the music, which was awesome. Granted, it's like friends and friends of friends and things like that, so a very friendly crowd. But what a feeling to see people react, to be able to share music that you kind of just been playing on your own in a little bubble for years, for a couple years at least, and then actually get out of that bubble in the bomb shelter basement of where we practice, and to just get out and be able to hug people and high-five people and see people, dance and smiling and even singing some words, which was a real highlight for me to see, wow, these people are mouthing some words. I have actually wrote some of these words. This is crazy. This is blowing my mind right now. So super grateful. It was a wonderful concert. Who knows? We're going to play more concerts. Who knows if we'll ever be able to match that experience? But it's just a wonderful, wonderful experience. And it reminded me that, wow, you can still have that thrill like you get from traveling, right? That thrill when you go into a new destination, it's just thrilling. That's the word that keeps coming up. Being able to kind of live somewhere and still be able to do things that give you such a thrill. And this shared experience amongst humans was just awesome. So a few lessons I just wanted to share with you that I pulled out from that. First of all, when all said and done, first lesson for me, a reminder I should say, is getting out of your comfort zone is always worth it, no matter how scary it seems at the time. Because I was pretty nervous. I think we all were, all of us who haven't done this before, and even those that had. And it was just a reminder that, wow, I should say almost always, but I almost say all the time, getting out of your comfort zone is a good thing. And it's not easy to do because it's easy to kind of just be like, well, we don't have to push ourselves that much because it's really uncomfortable to do X, Y, or Z. But every time I get out of my comfort zone, it's just such a payoff, in the long run. It just, I don't know, it builds some kind of muscle. It makes me a better person personally, just for my own internal mental health. I feel like I, stared something down and overcame it, even if I bombed or even if it didn't come out as good as I thought it was going to be and whatever it is I'm doing. Just getting out of the comfort zone is maybe the point sometimes. So just a reminder there on that. Number 2 was, no matter how bad you screw up or how many mistakes you make, people are generally forgiving when you have the right attitude. And boy, did I make a lot of mistakes on the stage. Luckily, we have a lot of guitars in the band, so maybe they blended in a bit. But, I know I screwed up some parts and things like that. But, we were having fun. Crowd was having fun. And, it's that attitude you bring, right? I mean, I think this goes for work, for creative work, for anything that you're putting out there, when you're putting yourself out there. I feel like people are just forgiving if you just have sort of the right attitude. And to me, like with this podcast, I think, to use a specific example, my intention here, my attitude is really to serve you. This show's for you. So I want to make it fun. I want to make it entertaining. I want you to come away with some inspiration, some practical advice, mix of all these different things that we do on the show. And I want to have a good attitude about the whole thing and really try to put something else out there. Does that mean I never screw up or every show's great? No, of course not. I screw up all the time, as you hear. I mean, this is why I have an editor. You should hear how much I screw up without the editor. So, but you know what? No matter how much you screw up, how many mistakes you make, whatever you're doing, people don't care. They really, it doesn't bother them as long as you really have the right attitude, treat people with respect. You're there to serve, whether it's an audience, your customers, your friends, your family, whatever. It really goes along the way. So I was reminded to not worry too much about making mistakes and screwing up. So I wanted to share that with you. And lastly, this kind of ties in. It's not about you. It's about others. So whether it's music, business, something else, reminding yourself that you're there to serve others, or maybe to hold space for others. If you're sitting down with a friend having coffee and they need you to lend an ear, maybe you're holding space for people. There are a lot of ways to quote unquote serve others, or just kind of be there for people, right? I think it takes a lot of the pressure off yourself, gets you out of your own head, and it makes everything more fun. Because when you're scared to do something like play a concert, and then you remember, oh, this isn't about me. This is about these people that are coming to have a good time. So let's just kick some butt and do the best we can and show these people a good time. And forget all the junk going on in our own heads. When we put the focus on others and showing them the good time or the good experience, I mean, you've probably seen this and you know this as a traveler, having received that hospitality. It's such a wonderful feeling. And then, I especially find this with travelers, when you come home and you get a chance to host somebody or show somebody around your hometown, you realize, oh, this is my chance to be that person for them. They're passing through my town, and now I get to be the story that they tell later by just giving them an experience because I recommended a food place for them, or I took them somewhere, I told them to go on this hike, or whatever the case is. I gave these visiting relatives or these visiting friends or this random stranger passing through town a great experience. I showed them some things they never would have seen, and they're going to remember that and remember those stories. So it really is about others, and that really takes the pressure off and gets us out of our own heads. So those were just 3 things coming out of this crazy weekend concert experience thing that I just wanted to highlight and share with you that I think were some good universal reminders for myself, and I thought it might be helpful to share those with you. So hope that was okay. Hope you enjoyed it. Now, let's see. I should leave you with a quote, huh? I got to get into the quote drawer here. I got to dig deep, my friends. This drawer is a mess, by the way. There are plastic bags, chocolate bars, random receipts that I haven't paid off, a dead cell phone that needs to be charged. There you go. It's one of those drawers. Anyway, here we go. This one's from the late, great Thich Nhat Hanh, who said, "Your true home is not limited by time, space, nationality, or race." There you have it. Another one in the books. Thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being a part of this community. Much love to you, to your family, to your friends. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And I'll see you next week. Peace and love.
This podcast has been brought to you by Zero to Travel.